One of the most frequently asked questions that I get all the time is, do I have to go gluten-free? I'm Kirstin Nussgruber from Kirstin'sCancerCare.com, and I help people get out of cancer overwhelm by teaching them really how to reclaim their lives. And smart nutritional choices is one puzzle piece in this approach. So, do I need to go gluten-free? That is a very good question. Everything seems to be gluten-free these days. When we go to the supermarkets, there are rows and rows and rows of gluten-free products. They seem to kind of be mushrooming out everywhere. So people think, great, maybe it's a trend. Maybe the supermarkets are pushing us into a direction and they're making it very easy for me. So I'll just swap gluten products for gluten-free products, and that will probably secure my health. So let's shed a little bit of light on whether or not you really need to be gluten-free and what that kind of entails. So if you have certain health conditions, and you will know if you have them, at least I think you will, such as a wheat allergy, and an allergic reaction is an immediate reaction. When you are exposed to that trigger that causes an allergy or an allergic reaction in your body that can be as mild as just a little bit of itching to as severe as an anaphylactic shock, and you could die within minutes, you will have that reaction right away. So a wheat allergy would fall into that category. Or if you have an autoimmune disease called celiac, that is a disease that if you have it, you have it. You can manage it, but you can't really cure yourself of it. You have to kind of keep all the triggers low, manage the progression of the disease, and make sure you don't trigger this. But if you have celiac, you have to be wheat-free. Same as with a wheat allergy. You will be sensitive not just to direct consumption of anything that is wheat-related, but also so-called cross-contamination. If any kind of wheat particles get onto other food sources or even cutting boards, or if they are found in cosmetic products, in other household cleaning products, you will react. Then, of course, you need to be gluten-free, and that equals the same as being wheat-free. However, now comes in the so-called food sensitivity, and that's a bit of a more gray area, because if you are sensitive to wheat, you probably won't react right away. It probably will take some time for you to react, unless you're, of course, consuming wheat all the time and you're just constantly in the state of reaction. And what could that be? What are the symptoms that could be bothering you? And one of the reasons we kind of look at is to see, do you have a sensitivity to gluten? Well, first of all, bloating, constantly having a distended belly, feeling like you are pregnant when you're not supposed to be. You can have headaches, you can have migraines, you can have brain fog, you can have memory retention issues, you can have joint pain. So there are all kinds of symptoms that can be symptomatic of so many other conditions, but one of them could be sensitivity to gluten. So obviously, if that is the case, you should be gluten-free for a while. Sometimes we can recover. And let me delve into that a little bit more here too, because wheat is still, and always has been, a very important staple food. It's very rich in B vitamins, for example, and other nutrients. So it was always a staple in our diet. And even to this day, if we go to some of the Western European countries and eat wheat products there, they do not necessarily have the same reaction than if we would be eating the same or similar wheat-derived products here in the United States. And what are wheat-derived products? Well, anything that was made with wheat flour. So you get the refined stuff, right? The white bread, white pasta, cakes and pastries and cookies, pizza crusts, but you also get the whole wheat variety, which is supposedly more healthy, right? Because it's made from whole grain, it has the fiber in it, but it's still made from wheat. So I'm referring to both refined and whole wheat products. People that go to Western Europe sometimes and that have issues when they eat wheat here in the United States do not have the same issues over there. So that's another fact we need to consider. So Let's take a little step back, because I'm all about teaching you a so-called conquering cancer diet. And what does that mean? We have thought for a very long time that if we have a certain genetic predisposition, that's it. We're kind of on a higher risk path to obtaining a certain chronic disease, and I will include cancer in that, as well as an autoimmune diseases. There are many of them, and people are being diagnosed more and more with an autoimmune condition. And that's also pretty serious these days, same as what cancer is. The risk of getting another autoimmune disease, if you've been diagnosed with one, is up by 300%. So once diagnosed with an autoimmune condition, meaning your own body is attacking you, that's quite a serious diagnosis, same as what cancer is. So how can we now try and lower that risk, lower that exposure? And what has gluten got to do with it? So again, going back to the theory that once we have a genetic predisposition, kind of that's it. However, over the last, 20 years or so, research has been made great strides in the area of so-called epigenetics, and that means the environmental factors on our genes. And we know now that only about 25% of our genes are actually activated, and 75% of our genes need to be switched on or off. And how we live, how we eat, we can influence that. So that's one important factor that we need to understand. Through our lifestyle, we can actually control whether certain genes, and these include genetic mutations that put us on an elevated risk for getting chronic diseases, they don't necessarily need to be switched on. They need to be switched on when certain conditions exist. And these conditions can either be environmental triggers, or they can be certain bodily conditions, inflammatory conditions inside our bodies that can be caused through certain lifestyle and habits that we have, nutritional habits as well. So if they converge, a genetic predisposition, certain environmental triggers, and certain conditions such as intestinal permeability or leaky gut, that converges, then our risk of actually getting diagnosed with a chronic condition such as cancer or any one of the autoimmune conditions is very high and probably very likely. And this can happen throughout our lives. So going back to gluten. So we can rule out that we do not have a wheat allergy and we do not have celiac disease. That's great. Do we have a sensitivity to gluten? That is something we can find out. Is that permanent? And is that really a problem? Well, the problem is really that we need to understand that the wheat that we are exposed to here in the United States is most likely, the conventional wheat is most likely contaminated with a lot of pesticides that are not allowed to be used in Western Europe. And the rate of chronic diseases in Western Europe is lower than here in the United States. So if we are reacting to wheat products, we need to find out two things. Are we reacting because we are sensitive to wheat or gluten and the components in wheat? Or are we reacting because of pesticide exposure that was on wheat? And why are these two things important? Well, let's go back to the gut health. As you know, that is the absolute basis, the foundation for our health, foundation for our immune system. So vitally, vitally important. We need to ensure that we have a tight gut, that we have an integrous gut, meaning that our intestinal lining needs to be absolutely tight. And whatever goes on inside, right, digestion-wise, can't leak out into our surrounding bloodstream where it can cause inflammation and issues. Now, there is a certain protein responsible for keeping the integrity of our cell membrane in our gut tight. In other words, keeping the individual cells absolutely tight together. And this protein was only discovered as early as 2000. That's not that long ago. That professor is now teaching actually at Harvard University. So this protein zonulin is responsible for keeping our cells in our gut tight. If these cells are damaged, opened up. And that can happen through gluten. It can also happen through one of the pesticides that is very widely used globally, but especially here in the United States, that is glyphosate. And glyphosate has been noted as a carcinogen by the International Research Agency on Cancer. It's the IARC, the International Agency for Research on Cancer. They consider it an official carcinogen. So glyphosate as well as gluten can cause those openings in our cells, in our gut. And that means that not only do food particles that are in the process of being digested can leak through into the bloodstream, causing inflammation, but this protein zonulin can also do that, enter our bloodstream, and that's when it can create havoc there too. So if we have a situation where our gut lining has been compromised, and that can be through medication, chronic medication, cancer treatments, chemotherapy, everyone undergoing chemotherapy, absolutely you have leaky gut. We don't even need to test you for that, we know that. But also, for example, other medications, like even just one hefty dose of antibiotics can so disturb the balance in your gut that can cause leaky gut. It can also cause, for example, a particular enzyme that the body makes that we have in our gut. It's the DPP4, 4 in Roman numerals, enzyme that can neutralize this protein zonulin. But that can be annihilated by antibiotics or by a complete dysbiosis in our gut. So then we have the problem, then we have the damage in our gut lining, and then we have zonulin in our bloodstream. And zonulin can turn on certain genes that we don't want to have turned on. So if we have that genetic predisposition, that can then be activated by zonulin. Zonulin is a very, very important protein that sits on a particular chromosome 16, and that particular segment, chromosome segment, also has other genetic dispositions for a whole host of different cancers, breast cancer included, brain cancer as well as certain autoimmune conditions too. So it's a very crucial little link in our epigenetics that we need to be cognizant of, and we need to really, really be careful of. So figure out if you are actually sensitive to gluten, if you are bloated when you eat certain foods and you are bloated all the time, distended all the time. Are you like that? Are you eating wheat products, or for example, corn products, maybe corn chips as well? Do you feel the same way? Why do we want to know this? Well, am I reacting to gluten, which we find in wheat? Okay. Protein in wheat, of course, or are we reacting, if we are reacting to corn chips too, for example, that's got nothing to do with wheat, but conventional corn crops here in the United States are also sprayed with the same pesticide, glyphosate, that is an official carcinogen. Then we know that we have a glyphosate problem, toxicity in our body. And it's not necessarily just related to gluten, but it actually is, we are responding to glyphosate. And that could possibly also explain why sometimes people who eat gluten-containing products in Western Europe don't react at all, don't have any symptoms of discomfort, yet they do when they eat that over here. Then one can generally point in the direction of saying that's probably because of the glyphosate contamination rather than the actual gluten protein. So also, let's understand gluten in general in terms of a conquering cancer diet. What we want to try and achieve as well is have or eat a so-called low glycemic diet. We don't want to have elevated blood sugar levels. We want to have the mechanism by which glucose is able to enter the cell, meets up with insulin. We want to have a regulated system there and not have the system flooded with glucose and insulin, because most cancers, when they switch their energy production to a much more less efficient way, that they rely a lot more on glucose. They have so many more insulin receptors on their cell membranes wanting to needing glucose. That's what they need in order to produce energy. So we have that what is called a metabolic underlying condition of a cell that has turned cancerous, and we want to not feed into that, right? So we want to eat in a low glycemic way. And grains, especially wheat grains, they can lead to an imbalance here, and they are more of a high glycemic level. So that is another reason why we don't really want to stuff ourselves with gluten-containing foods, particularly not the refined foods, because they are just converted to glucose at a much faster rate in the body. So we want to make sure that that happens at a very slow level. So really gluten-containing products, how is our individual relationship to insulin, to the insulin glucose metabolism? That's something that we all need to figure out, something we look at when I work with my clients as well, to understand, well, where are you? How well do you metabolize carbohydrates? And, what else is going on from an inflammatory point of view in your body? And should you be gluten-free, yes or no? That is often a very individually based decision in that instance as well. So other factors play into that as well. So another just word of caution in terms of gluten-free, people think that, right, I'm not supposed to eat gluten. I might give it a try and see if it alleviates my symptoms, and I'll just switch to gluten-free products that I can buy. Often the gluten-free products are actually, funnily enough, less healthy than your wheat gluten-containing product. They have less fiber. They are often made with certain low-fiber starches coming from often white rice and corn, which can be genetically modified too, or potato starch. Those are so-called high glycemic, high starchy flours too. So gluten-free products can then elevate your blood sugar levels even more. So we also don't want to expose ourselves to that too. So if we have to go gluten-free, if that is the better choice for us, it's a wonderful opportunity for us to open ourselves up to eating more whole foods, exploring how do we prepare meals, whole meals, using, real food, and just leaving out the gluten-containing starches. And again, that's something that I teach my clients to do. You can eat wonderfully on a gluten-free diet without having to rely on the gluten-free products that you buy off the shelves. It requires you to be a little bit experimental, but that is the fun part of it. And we also often learn just to eat in a different way. So it moves us away from thinking I have to replace the same product with that same product into a whole different area of food preparation, and how I can just make food be tasty and less inflammatory as well. So just to kind of summarize a little bit again, think about it again this way. Genetic predisposition, now that is a given, absolutely. So we inherit genes from our ancestors, and that includes certain genetic mutations that could predispose us or increases our risks to getting, for example, certain cancers. But they don't need to be switched on. They can stay dormant. If we have environmental triggers that are added to that, and gluten can be one of them, but also the pesticide used on wheat products, glyphosate, can also be another trigger. And then we have a condition in the body, one of the imbalances that is called leaky gut or intestinal permeability. Then that is a sure way, a recipe of inducing a lot of inflammation and creating an inner environment that is then conducive to having a diagnosis of an autoimmune diagnosis or a cancer diagnosis. And research is ongoing in that area, and fascinating to watch. I mean, there's even talk now that certain cancers are actually autoimmune conditions. So we just we follow that and see what comes up. But we're learning a lot along the way. We're learning how we define our genetic path. We don't have to go down the road of having this risk turn into reality, but it does require us to be our own advocates and be responsible for our own health and understand the health choices that we make, and listening to our bodies as well. Your body will tell you if it doesn't like a certain food. And Also be mindful if you have a certain infection and you have received antibiotics. It just takes one dose of antibiotics and it can annihilate your gut health. So always think, if it's the number one priority in your life, you have to look after your gut microbiome. And that in itself is a full-time job, but it's something we need to be mindful of. We need to have that really functioning well, so that when certain triggers happen, we don't go along the path of a possible chronic diagnosis. So I hope that has shed some light on, should I go gluten-free or not? It depends, right? Obviously, yes, if you have celiac or if you have a wheat allergy, and if you think you may have a gluten sensitivity, go test that. There are some good tests out there that look for whether you need to do that or not. Vibrant Wellness has one that's called the Wheat Zoomer. That is a test that is available to the public without needing it to be prescribed by a doctor, and it basically gives you information that you can then use to make certain lifestyle changes all on your own. And that looks for zonulin, for example. It looks for leaky gut as well, and looks for the different types of proteins, not just gluten, but we have other parts of wheat that we could be sensitive to, and it gives you a lot of information as well. Or try out the good old elimination diet. Leave it out. Leave wheat products out for a while if you have certain symptoms, and see how you feel when you reintroduce them. See if your symptoms improve when you're not exposed to wheat. And if it's not that easy for you, because often it isn't, then you really need to put yourself into the care of a practitioner. And we help you. We help you figure that out. We help you piece the puzzle pieces together and try and find what's optimal for you. Any more inspiration for you guys? Then go to my website, Kirstin'sCancerCare.com, Kirstin'sCancerCare.com. Have a look there. There's blogs, there's recipes there. I have an awesome program too, a first step program for you too, and another program in the pipeline throughout this year. So just hop on there. I've written a book, and there's a free chapter download for you too, if you want to sign up for any of my newsletters or informational events. It's about empowering you. That's what I'm here for, and that's what these chats are for. So thank you for tuning in. Give me comments. Let me know how you do, if you found this useful or not. I'd love to hear from you, and take care for now.